Those of you who know me know that I don't really get embarrassed or ashamed very easily, but I'm going to start with the story of one of the most embarrassing times of my life. And Nikki's not here right now, otherwise she'd be really nervous. And strangely, Gordon somewhere is probably nervous. That's an inside joke for those of you who don't know. But there was one of my strange practices, especially when I was traveling so much for work. After a long day, usually in a hot factory, I would go back to the hotel room, just turn the AC all the way down, strip down to my underwear, and just veg out for a little bit. I know you may think it's weird, but if you traveled, you know what I'm talking about. Well, one particularly rough day, 14, 15 hours working on a hard problem, was headed back to the hotel, called ahead to have room service delivered to the room so it would already be there when I got there, and I could just eat, grab a couple hours sleep, and I had to be right back the next day. So I walk in, and there's the tray, and everything's great. I do my usual routine, AC on 60, sit down, strip down, and start to eat. Well, I get finished, and like usual, if you stay in a hotel and you have room service, what are you supposed to do with the tray after you're done? You set it out in the hallway. So I look out the door, quick peek, and there's nobody there. So I step out to do the deed, right? Put the tray in the hallway. And as I'm doing, I leaned a little too far, and I hear behind me, click. Oh. The door, of course, closed. And so now here I am in a hallway in a really nice hotel, in nothing but my underwear. What are we gonna do? So I run down to near where the elevators are, hoping there's one of those house phones I can call down. Of course, there's not. So here we go. Get in the elevator, go down to the front desk. Now it's about 11 o'clock at night, so I'm thinking there's gonna be nobody there. And sure enough, as I'm walking up, I can't even imagine what that receptionist was thinking. But I walk up and I tell her my name and here's my room number. I accidentally locked out, can you give me a key? And she looks me square in the face and says, I need some ID. Do I look like I have any ID on me? She said, just a minute, I'll get one of the maintenance staff to come let you in. Well, okay. So I'm standing there, and I'm thinking this is just gonna be a little bit, and no one else is gonna see me, and sure enough, open the doors, and here comes 3 entire flight crews have just landed, and now they're gonna check in, and there I am standing, and so I ran around and tried to hide behind one of the plants that was there, and I don't know what it looked like, but this is how I felt. There is no lobby plant in the world big enough to cover this. Just doesn't happen. So I'm standing there. What was only a few minutes felt to me like an eternity. Finally, I just whispered to her while she's checking all these people in, can't you please get someone to just meet me up there? And so I hear her get on the radio, and I don't speak a lot of Spanish, but I speak and understand enough to know that she said, will someone let this fat man in his room? Okay, great. So I go back up, and sure enough, wonderful maintenance gentleman was there to let me in, and that was the end of it. I don't know of very many times in my life where I've felt more embarrassed. I can't imagine how red my face was, and it was starting to, make its way down my chest, I'm sure, for everybody to see. But it was definitely one of the most shameful experiences that I've ever had. And for somebody who doesn't feel that very often, it really made an impact on me. Now, the reason I tell you that story is because in my personal study, I've been studying a lot about some of the physical aspects of the cross. And some of my lessons that you've heard have been about how his actual body was handled, and we looked at the type of cloth he was wrapped in, and I even brought in some of the herbs that were used as a prop, I guess, physical aid for us to understand that. Some of the very last words that he spoke. And one of the things that I was thinking on lately is there's a verse in Hebrews that we don't really talk about a lot, Hebrews chapter 12. And we talk about Hebrews chapter 12 a lot, but in verse 2, it says, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is now seated at the right hand of the throne of God. And for all the things that I've studied over the years about the cross, and I've read this verse, I can't tell you how many countless times, I never really thought about until recently, how was there shame in the cross? Jesus didn't do anything wrong. He didn't do something of which he should have been ashamed. It's not like he committed some great sin or murder or something that caused them to put him on that cross. So I started digging a little bit more into what's the real definition of the word that's used here. That's what it looks like. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. And there is an element of this word that sometimes it is used in that you have done something shameful. But the vast majority of the time this word is used, it's about that dishonor or that disgrace. Literally, one of the definitions is to take something that is beautiful and to disfigure it, to make it ugly. But perhaps the most common usage of this word was to expose something or someone to the ridicule of society. Well, how was Jesus exposed to the ridicule? Well, thanks to our Roman Catholic friends and roughly 1,500 years of societal exposure, this is probably what most of us think about when we picture Jesus on the cross. Somebody who was stripped down to a loincloth and then nailed with his hands and his feet to this cross, then lifted up to hang there until he died. However, this image is wrong. And not because we don't know what Jesus looked like or any of those things, but because it was so shameful, the Roman Catholic Church decided that you could not depict the Savior nude. And so it gave him this loincloth. But in reality, Jesus was stripped completely of all of his clothing and exposed to the entire world when he was nailed on that cross. All four of the Gospels talk about how he was stripped down, but yet in John chapter 19, we find even more details. Verses 23 and 24 read, when the soldiers had crucified Christ, they took his garments and divided them into 4 parts, one part for each soldier, and also his tunic. But the tunic was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. So they said to one another, let us not tear it, but cast lots for it, to see whose it shall be. This was to fulfill the scripture which says, they divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. So the soldiers did these things. And for years, when I have read this verse, and it mentions almost all of the English translations use that word tunic, which really, in my mind, being kind of the medieval swords and sorcery kind of guy I am, I think of like an overcoat, a tunic that was more like a long shirt. That's not really what it was. The word there is shivron, And the closest thing we would have to it is long underwear. It was shorts and a shirt in one piece that was worn directly next to the skin. By our very definition, it was underwear. So then if you think about that verse again, they took all of his clothes and his underwear was one solid piece, so they cast lots for that. All scholars agree that Jesus wasn't wearing that loincloth. He was exposed to being completely naked when he was hung there for everyone who walked by to see. I was in my underwear for 6 minutes in a hotel, and it was almost more than I could stand. For 6 hours, Jesus hung on that cross, completely nude, exposed to everybody. And it's not just the nudity. And I don't want to be gross, and I'm not trying to gross you out this morning, but I think it's important we look at the physical facts. There was no such thing on the cross as, I need a bathroom break. Hey, can you take me down so I can go over here and use the restroom? In fact, there are many documented cases of people standing around when multiple people were crucified, taking bets on who would wet themselves or who would soil themselves first. Because under the excruciating pain of that death, many of your bodily functions went out of your control. And even if you somehow survived all of the actual time you were alive without soiling yourself, nobody survives the dying without the body muscles relaxing and releasing fluids and solids. Just about the most disfigured and ugly that you can make a human body. And that was Jesus. For 6 solid hours, he hung on that cross before he died. I can't imagine the pain. And we've all talked about lessons of, how he would have died from suffocation and the pain it would have caused to try to push yourself up on those nails. But I don't think in 40 plus years of being a Christian, I had ever really thought about what it meant, the shame that he had to go through of every single last hidden secret of his body being exposed to the world. It makes it even worse when I think of him saying to his mother, "Mother, behold your son," in full nudity, having soiled himself most likely. Not exactly a proud moment for any mother. But for all of that, we find that he despised that shame. And that's not really a phrase that we typically would understand. So I love the way, I believe it's the International Christians Bible is what ICB stands for, International Children's Bible, I'm sorry. It words this, but he accepted the shame of the cross as if it was nothing. As if all of that embarrassment, all of that shame of having everything exposed, it didn't even count to him because of the things and because of what that act would gain for you and I. We talk a lot about how that the pain he took is really our pain, but the shame he took really should be our shame. We deserve to be in that place, stripped naked, beaten, and hung upon a cross for everyone to look at. For those who walk by to wag their heads and ridicule him. And yes, some of that was for the saying that was above him, "Here's the King of the Jews." But an equal of that was ridiculing a man who has had all of his innermost secrets exposed, his physical secrets anyway. It's hard for me, I think, to really understand how shameful that must have been. And the reason I started with that story is that's as close as I've ever come in my life to something like that. And it was pretty terrible for me. Maybe not for you. If you don't look like me, maybe it would be a good thing. I don't know. But would any of us want that? To be completely exposed, and even if there weren't nails, just hung out for everyone to see, for everyone to watch you do those things. I don't think any of us would want that. So this morning, as we partake of this feast, which he asked us to do in remembrance of him, let's think about the shame that we are spared, because he considered that shame as nothing for our sakes. At this time, we'll have the guys come forward and lead us.